we're surrounded by the vision that you've got to be aggressive to succeed in business. And I've always thought, well, I want to do well at what I do, and I enjoy business. I just don't want to do that. Whilst making sometimes difficult decisions, you can think about their journey and treat them with kindness. And I think that, for me, that comes from a feeling of strength rather than you're doing it because you're weak. First point, something goes from being impossible to being possible. It's just by somebody saying out loud to somebody else that it can.
Welcome.
So lovely to see you.
So lovely to have you here and finally sit down together. It's been one of the conversations I've been most excited about for a long time. Can you give the audience some context as to who the legendary Marcus Exall is?
I can tell you the context of which I'm most known, I suppose, these days. I suppose I'm most known as an angel investor. I've been doing that not as long as some of my friends and certainly not as prolifically, but over the last 10, 11 years, I've invested in 31 companies. So I suppose I'm generally most known for that. I've built some of my own businesses over time and businesses with friends since 2002. Previous to that, I'd been working in larger companies or starting businesses for other people. And then sort of my so-called entrepreneurial journey, I suppose, started sort of at a point where, I can tell you, it started in the Tokyo Diner in Soho, where I met a friend and said, should we do something? Should we work for other people? And so we return there occasionally and sort of reprise the meal. And so I've been sort of doing entrepreneurial things, mostly to do with the internet, and when I started, it was called the World Wide Web still, back in the day. And I've been involved in sort of digital technologies of the web for, got my first job, anything to do with it, in 97. So I've been doing it sort of 27 years now. These days, I suppose, as well as the angel investing, I advise and meet a lot of founders and try and help them where I can on their journey.
And outside of work?
Been with the same lady, Vicky, for nearly 31 years. Very lucky to have found my soulmate so young, and she's definitely the foundation on what everything that I do is because she's such a wonderful person and has helped me. Nothing that I've done would have been possible without her. And then I've got two lovely children, Mia, Matt's coming up to 20 and 18, and they're a tremendous amount of fun and a joy. Being a parent and running a business, as lots of founders with families will know, is not always easy, but they're the biggest part of my world, the most important bit.
Before we dive into the specifics of investing and the startup journey, what did you take from Japanese culture into company building?
Wow. I think a lot of it, did I take it directly? I don't know. I probably post-rationalized this stuff more than I think it was deliberate. I think in Japanese culture, it's not about you, it's about the greater good. And so I think there's a component of that. I wouldn't say necessarily I took it. I think that's probably because of how I grew up and everything. That's always appealed to me. It's not about you. Are you contributing? Are you like looking out for others before you look out for yourself? So I think that there was a certain resonance in that journey. I think I just always had a fascination with Japanese culture because when I was growing up, we had foreign students from the local language school stay in our spare room. And when I was younger, a lot of those were Japanese. My mum was brilliant at keeping in touch. So every Christmas, we'd get these wonderful little parcels of interesting things, and you if you read anything about Japan and what it's like, it had always felt to me like you could see the future from there. And I suppose I was lucky to be living there as the internet, in sort of 1995, as the internet was starting to really kick off. And so the Japanese love of technology, I suppose that it really came up in my consciousness very quickly. And maybe it wouldn't have done so much if I'd have been here. But, I mean, possibly. But being this seemed to make it feel like a more natural thing. I suppose I've loved the study of Japanese. There's something about, I don't know, the rigor and the systems and things that you need to do it. It's not. I don't think it's an intellectual process at all. Weirdly, I think it's a systems thing. That if you have a method of approaching the learning, then you can do it. I think I found a lot of the people who struggled with it were people who had been linguists before and tried to fit their rules. I was a bit of a languages dunce, 2 years of O levels or GCSE French at school, and so I came to it, fresh. Something about the systems thinking, maybe about the processes. I would also say it was probably the first time where I in my life that I'd loved the learning. There's bits that I'd enjoyed about studying business, which I'd studied sort of after school, but I loved the learning, and I loved what I had to do every day to get there. And so I suppose some of that thinking, it felt like data, I suppose, in a way, about the way you approach the system of getting it into your brain.
Feels very abstract.
Well, I think it is to a certain extent. I suppose it prepares you doing that in such an intense way. I was studying 10 hours a day, one subject, and classes of 2 or 3 people. 6 hours a day at school, 4 hours of homework every single day, and then 3 hours a day at the weekend. There's something about that prepares you, I think, for running a company, because there's no hiding place. You couldn't afford to be 24 hours behind, because if you did, you didn't understand a single word that was said to you the next day.
Quick 10-second pause to say that our newsletter is the highest value per sentence in your inbox. We share systems, prompts, and scripts that you can use today, because content without action is just noise. All the links in the description. Now, let's get back to the episode. So it sounds like this attitude towards work feels quite synonymous with the attitude towards work needed for startup building.
I suppose to some extent. I mean, I'd always worked since I was 10, and so the work to hustle, earn a bit of money, and that I suppose was there. But it was the first time I'd really felt like I'd applied it to learning, because it was the first time I'd really enjoyed the process. School kind of passed me by a bit, I think. It was a place to go every day, and if you enjoyed what that particular teacher was teaching you, fine. But I definitely at that stage I had no love of the process of academic learning at all, I would say.
It seems like you have this tendency to dive into something, going from not really being drawn to languages at school to 10 hours a day of Japanese. Also, Vicky told me a story about how you went to a barbecue with her colleagues and you tried a delicacy, which is the sea snail.
Tell you that story. Yeah, so my introduction to Japan was quite soft, I would say, because I was on a European Commission training program, and Vicky's was quite stark and very real. She was living Japanese sort of like getting on the commuting into an office in central Tokyo, working in a sort of a Japanese office of an international company. So her experience was way more full on than mine. I was sort of like coddled, sort of into it, not let loose on general society till I could speak some of the language. We went to into barbecue, and her colleagues had very generously bought this great delicacy in our honour, which was these giant sea snails.
How big is giant?
They're about that size. The shells, like these great horny shelled things, and they we had to go and collect them from the supermarket. You have to order them specially, and then you're told that these things have been bought, because you're there. And it's only when they stick them on the barbecue that you realise that these things are still alive when they put them on the barbecue. So you sit and watch these things writhe while cooking their own juices. And Vicky, quite understandably, even though they've been bought, and I just couldn't bring herself to have one. And so you have to get a skewer, the disc that they would use to normally as sort of the end of the snail that would stick to things with. It's hardened, sort of almost like a ceramic. And you have to get a spike in and wind this thing out of its shell. It's definitely one of the most challenging things I've ever eaten. And I've when you're in Japan, you're given certain, when you're out with people from companies, live squid and things like that. But this was the most challenging thing I think I ate while I was there. The end of it was so bitter. It's the remnants of its last meal. And then the main bit of the snail, I've never eaten a car tyre, but I'm imagining it's not a dissimilar experience. This thing, when you get it out of the shell, it's about so thick and about that long. It took me 45 minutes to chew it. But I had to, because, everyone said to go, what do you think? Great. So that was me doing the, taking one for our team, I think.
Very kind of you. And this kindness is a thread which shows up in every conversation I've had with people close to you when they are describing you. And it seems to be a hallmark of how you live life and how you work. Nick, your co-founder up and to the right, also said that it's something you view as a strength, not a weakness. Can you speak more to that?
I would always hate that people think that being kind to others and being in a position to be kind, you don't have to take advantage of people. You can take them along the journey, and that comes from strength. And choosing to put people first is, other than yourself, is a sign of strength. And kindness. It's not stepping on people. And I think that I always had that in mind. I could only do, we're surrounded, by the vision that you've got to be aggressive and to succeed in business. And I've always thought, well, I want to do well at what I do, and I enjoy business. I just don't want to do that. So I think I've always had that in mind, that I would try and, no, I'm not perfect. I've definitely had those moments where I get, stressful in business, and I've shouted at somebody in a meeting, and I'm definitely not proud of, those things. And, we all have those moments. And I'm not a saint at all, but I do believe that, whilst making sometimes difficult decisions, you can treat people with, thoughtfulness and kind, think about their journey and treat them with kindness. And I think for me that comes from a feeling of strength rather than you're doing it because you're weak. So I think that's how I've always viewed it.
How does that balance with the need to be very decisive and what some people might describe as being ruthless in company building? How do you advise founders when they have to lay people off, or they have to make difficult decisions which don't lend themselves to kindness?
I suppose to a certain extent I would say how I've justified it to myself, but I suppose I believe in this, is that you can't look after absolutely everybody, and sometimes the journey isn't right for certain people. And to look after the whole, you have to you know, you have to help some people move on. I mean, some people sometimes just, you know, people just not turn up a lot, you know, because they fancy just not turning up that day, and it's not right for the people who put in the hard work to keep, you know, to say that it's okay to do that. Again, I think that's being kind to the people who were there and putting in the effort, rather than making a choice to be unkind to the other people. What I've also found, and I have had, not everybody, but I have some people, when you've moved them on, because clearly they were, a lot of people when I've let them go, because we've say be unhappy with their performances, often they're really unhappy because they're not in the right role for them. I think we can all be unhappy doing something that's maybe not our skill set or the thing that we should be doing. I've had some people say, well, me stopping at that time and doing what I was doing for you is the thing that enabled me to found the thing that I should have been doing because I was really unhappy. I think actually it's really unkind to let people labour under doing something where you could give them direct feedback that would mean that they could probably end up being happier. So if you say, it's like if you get to an annual review and the first time somebody's heard that they're really not doing very well, when all of the evidence that you're presenting them with has come up over 9 months, then you've been unkind to them by not telling them how they're doing and telling them how they could improve. So it's not always just nicey. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to be direct about how somebody's doing so that they can make it better for the company, for them, or make the decision to do something that will be better for them. In all ways, it's always on you more than anything rather than on them, I think.
So it sounds like when thinking about the company, it's kindness on a macro level. What is most kind to the whole?
I think it's a balance, and I don't think there's perfect equilibrium. And it's one of the hardest things I think growing about. How do you make sure that everyone is developing, you know, that everyone's getting the feedback that they need while you're, you know, fighting 20 different fires at the same time of the things that a client that's, you know, unhappy and about to churn, whilst, you know, there's a regulator breathing down your neck on a particular issue or a legal thing that's come up. I mean, I've had lots of conversations this week with founders about, you know, the people bit is just, it's hard. And so many variables about, you know, what works, how have you recruited them, what are the expectations that everybody's got, has the communication been clear, and as well as what goes on with people inside work and conversations that they're having that you've not heard about, or what's going on in their lives outside of work. I think it's definitely, for me, it's, you know, it's the thing that I've always loved the most is working with, you know, choosing the people that you get to work with, but it's always, you know, the one thing that's the most difficult when I speak to founders.
The thing that I also recognize that most founders struggle with is the kindness themselves. People hold themselves to such a high standard and often whip themselves into performing. So when you hear a founder who is being potentially excessively hard on themselves, how do you encourage internal kindness?
I think what people always need is, you know, a space where they can, you know, not be the swan, just, you know, graceful on the surface and paddling furiously, you know, but saying everything how it is. I think, you know, you spoke to my mum. My mum's mantra growing up was always a trouble shared is a trouble halved. Just being able to say stuff out, having people that you can say out loud to it how it really is. Because, you know, you definitely want to protect your team from some of the worries so that they can feel good about sort of what they're doing. Because quite often, you know, the worries come and go, and you don't need to unnecessarily. I mean, yes, you can share it with some of the team. As you build bigger companies, you find people who can share that information and help you through it. But I think other than that, it's just people you can say stuff out loud to. I think that there must be something that goes on in the brain that when you can give voice to something, it just lessens sort of what the problem is. I think when you store it up, inside your own brain, and it rattles around for ages. I think that's carrying things around on your own is, I find that when people have beaten themselves up most and they've not shared it. So I think I definitely try to get people talking openly and creating a safe space where they feel that they can.
And how do you do that? I
suppose I talk about my own vulnerabilities, the ones that I've experienced and what I have now. I say very deliberately, like, there's a safe space, there's no judgment. Talking about my own mistakes, my own vulnerabilities in how I've done things, how I've run businesses, the challenges that I've had, and being open about those, I think that certainly helps. I get asked to talk to a lot of people maybe who are going through sort of hard times with their businesses. So I come, to a certain extent, sometimes I come recommended as somebody who can help. And so that hopefully, there's a little bit of trust built up before they get there.
Got something I'd love to show you. I had a incredible conversation with Josh from Nomio, who I know holds you in very high regard. So it's a little bit of a long video, but I think it's definitely worth watching. What you find special about Marcus?
I'll start with when I met him then. So I was introduced to Marcus by a guy called Alex Dunstan. One day I just had a random email intro from him saying, "Josh, you need cash. Marcus has cash. Enjoy." And so I met up with Marcus in Notes Coffee in Victoria, and we ended up talking for like 2 or 3 hours. And actually, here's the first really Marcus thing. When we started talking, I opened up my laptop to show him, deck and everything. He just said, "Put that away. I want to talk about you." So we just had a really good conversation and talked a little bit about the business, but it was mainly not the business. Then a few days after that, I just get a phone call from Marcus, and he's just calling to see how I'm doing and how things are. We had a brief chat, and then I was like, "That's kind of weird. What's this guy doing?" And then a few days after that, he sent me an email with a list of bullet points of like how he thinks he can help me. He's like, "Oh, I should introduce you to this person and this person, this person. Have you thought about this and this?" Not like telling me what to do at all, but just saying, "Hey, here are some people I think might be helpful for you to meet." And I was like, "Wow, this is great." And we kind of just ended up communicating more and more. And I remember everyone that he introduced me to was like enormously full of praise for him. And at first I didn't really get it. I checked him out on LinkedIn. I was like, okay, this guy isn't star-studded or anything. But then over time, as you get to know him, it's like you turn into this evangelist for Marcus. And now I am one of those people that evangelizes him. But it's amazing how many people know him and evangelize about him in such a way where you'd think this person must really know Marcus well and must have spent a lot of time with him. But then when you do the sum total, you're like, how the hell does this guy have enough time to have built this kind of connection with everyone? And he's got this kind of power where just makes you feel relevant and important. Just like the way that he has helped me personally has been like massively on the emotional side. He has made some really good recommendations like on the business side and helped me there. But he is the wise uncle who is often the first person I call, even when there's like a personal problem that I have. And he's easily the number one advisor, mentor, investor that we have. I'll tell you some other things. Like, it feels like he is incredibly lenient with me, with my idiocy. I don't know, if I feel emotionally turbulent, he's like the person who doesn't judge at all. So I can just be almost like the weakest version of myself with him, and I don't feel any judgment. And it feels like he's not seeing me as like worth any less. But I've noticed on multiple occasions now, when there's someone that I'm looking to hire, or like with this like partnership, it's like he's insanely protective and insanely skeptical of anyone who could threaten my journey, whether they mean to or don't, whether it's like this like fierce protection, but that isn't explicit. He's not an aggressive person in any way, but it just comes out that Marcus approaches this other person with like a degree of scrutiny that he just does not seem to apply to me. And it's so clear that like there's an asymmetry in how he treats people based on whether he's approaching it from the perspective of being on that person's team or not. He's on my team, and so he does not let anything through. Yeah, I genuinely feel like just I would not be here today with Nomia where it is if it wasn't for him.
Bless him.
What stands out?
I feel very privileged, insanely privileged that I get time to be there for other people. And I know what life can be like. Vicky does all her work in food insecurity and food poverty for children. So I know how hard life can be. Very, very hard to do what I do and be there for other people when they need help in an area that, you know, great people doing fascinating things that I find really interesting. I mean, it's just I find it an astonishing privilege to be able to do that. So if I can, you know, if people feel that I've helped them, I've made their life a bit easier, that I've managed to, you know, say something on the business side, you know, in a moment where they were, you know, trying to make a key decision, and I said something that just helped them make that decision, then I suppose that's the kind of impact that I want to have. But I think, as we were saying before, I find people mostly have their own answers, and what I provide is a bit of a space to chat about it and give themselves the confidence, maybe that little bit of extra confidence that they needed to push over the line of making decisions that they were probably going to make anyway.
Nick also praised your empathy and kindness and general ability with networking. How do you approach the idea of relationship building within work and outside of work? Are there any principles that you live by?
My form of networking is finding people to help. No, I will keep going back. This sounds a bit trite, but that is genuinely what I do. I both inside work and outside work. You know, I've got various people at various stages of certain journeys. If I know them well and I know they've got something going on, you know, sometimes they'll ask or I'll offer, and sometimes I've got various friends who will pick up the phone and go, would you meet this person? They need a bit of help with this particular thing in their business or sometimes in their life. And meet and have a coffee and see. It's not always a perfect match. And sometimes, you know, you have a coffee and it doesn't go any further. But sometimes it's the start of, you know, astonishing journeys.
That mindset feels quite far removed from the stereotypical startup and more specifically investor mindset. Can you talk a bit more about how you operate as an investor with this hat of kindness and looking to help and supporting founders?
I do say this, and I think I probably sound either weird or slightly bonkers when I say it, but on the investment side, I don't primarily do it for the money. I know that's essentially the measure of investing, you know, the return on the capital. And I am trying to make, you know, good decisions about what I do, because it's not just my money. It's it's ours as a family, so I've got to make good decisions. But it is a crazy asset class. I learned this from Robin Klein, who was one of, you know, the partners at Index. I went to talk with him, you know, a few years before I started. He said people say that, you know, you put your money into like ventures, don't do it. It's crazy. And he's right. Certainly as an angel investor, We all know the thing about the power law of investing, and it's early stage, huge variables. How can you possibly know? It feels a little bit like, and if you describe it as an investment, this is what I do with people who are thinking about starting. If I said to you, forget the fact it's startups, it's technology. I just said to you, I'd like you to give me, you've got that money there. I'd like you to give me that money and take it away. I'm going to put in some of these, I'm going to put it in this investment over here. But that's the last time you're going to get to see any of it for 7 to 10 years, probably, maybe longer. But actually, you shouldn't worry about that length of time because I'm 90% likely to lose all of it. So that's it as an asset class. So, I'm not from the valley, in the valley. I'm a bit of a home bird, so I don't, I'm not going to do loads of traveling just to meet loads of companies so I can invest and make loads more money. Certainly when I start, I'm going to have deal flow that means that I see the ones that are going to give me outsized returns. Maybe if I'm really lucky, but I don't do it on a purely, I know some people are very scientific. They are operating on the power law and they've got good returns, and I just don't do it like that. I try and meet great people doing interesting things. I follow them around for a long time, typically minimum 6 months. So if somebody comes to me and says, hot company, get in on this deal, and I'm sure there, some of that can work, but it's just not my way. I mean, mostly I follow people around for at least 6 months, sometimes quite a bit longer, before I decide to invest. Because not only have they've got to know that I'm right for them, as well as me, are we right for each other? Can I help? My check size isn't going to be the thing that necessarily moves the needle. So what are we, what is everyone going to get out of this? What journey are we going to go on together? And I think if you choose great journeys, even if the money side doesn't work out, you feel that you get a return on your cash. I've definitely had that experience. There's some, the occasional journey that hasn't worked as an investment, but I'd pay the same money again or more to have that same experience.
If you do look at it purely from an investment perspective in terms of how well your investments have done,
yeah,
compared to venture capital or angel investing on the whole, how well have you done?
Better than, I suppose, I'm still 85% invested and I've returned already like 2.5, going on 3 times my entire capital.
How come?
Luck. I genuinely mean that, because those returns have come from 2 of the first 3 companies I invested in. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I can't, I was in a position that I got to meet those people probably because I'd been around and I'd had an exit. So, but to the extent that I've made good choices, I don't think, I can't put that down to me. I mean, the stuff that I'm supposed to know more of what I'm doing now. So I'll be better judged that, am I a great angel investor by the, because I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. I'm not kidding you when I say that probably at least those first couple of investments, I'd sit in meetings and people would use phrases and I'd nod as if I knew what I was talking about. Pre-money, post-money. I didn't understand what that stuff meant. And so I'd go home and go frantic Googling to work out. And I built up, some of that knowledge over time, but probably more slowly than sort of the record of the companies I've invested in would have you believe.
So when you follow these founders for 6 months, what do you look for and how do you then decide whether to invest or not at the end of that 6 months?
I'd love to say it was some kind of rigorous scientific process, but in reality, it's more of a feeling. I feel real dissonance in relationships when I think that people won't treat others and their team like I like to treat people. So people who are sort of a bit more unkind or ruthless, I'm definitely looking for some of those red flags. because I'm likely to enjoy those journeys less. It doesn't mean to say you can't create. Some people create great companies by just being extra demanding. There's plenty of famous cases out there of that can create great things, and it can. It's just not it's not my way or the kind of journey that I want to go on. I don't want to see that, and that might be wrong. You could say to a certain extent that's wrong, because you're not necessarily always, if you have a certain way of driving things, it could be argued that you're driving people on to achieve their best, but it's just not my way. So I suppose I'm looking for those things. I'm definitely looking for how they think about what they're doing. I like people who ask for help, because I think people who, if people are vulnerable, and they're more likely to ask for help when it's really critical. And so trying to find a way of building up trust, so they will say, over that period of time when things are hardest, I find that to be a really good indicator that I'm the kind of person who will be able to help them on their journey. Because if it's just them feeling like they've got to sell to me as an investor. I mean, I do put energy into saying, look, the single most important thing you can do now that we've closed investment is forget that I gave you the money, and that this relationship is about money, because mostly it isn't. The money is there, and it's a facilitator of the relationship and what you're trying to do, but it's not the reason I'm doing this. So let's talk about everything.
And are there any other things that you have noticed separate, maybe not so much just founders that you're personally aligned with, but founders who are exceptional versus founders who are good?
Incredible focus. I'm not that focused, I would say. I'm a little bit tangential. I'm quite easily distracted. Yeah, I've met some great founders who just seem to me to be able to ruthlessly prioritize, do only the important things. I've definitely been, when I've been a founder or, running and growing businesses, I can have a tendency to do the thing that I enjoy doing rather than the thing that needs doing. And so I'm fascinated by people who can take all of the noise away, say no to lots of things that could distract them, and just get on with the really, really important stuff, even if it's really hard to do.
Is there a good example of what that looks like in practice?
Herman Improbable, he was always incredible. If we were going out for lunch, he would order lunch and not eat it, because he wanted to get the things out of the meeting that he wanted, and that meant not taking another bite of the food. I reckon that probably happened the first 8 to 10 times that we had like a breakfast or lunch or whatever together, because he had the things that he wanted to achieve in our conversation. And even if we were somewhere to eat and he'd ordered food, and those were interesting conversations. And also, I think just founders, I find that I learn so much. If the relationship is working well, and I'm somebody like Josh, he doesn't realise I'm learning probably more from him, and the way that he's thinking about what he's doing is he might be learning from me. It's very. I think when it works well, it's symbiotic.
That's the sign of a very strong relationship, is where both people feel like they're getting more out of the relationship than the other.
With any founder where I've got a strong ongoing conversational relationship, I really enjoy it. Josh is a fantastic example, because he challenges me. So, what are you thinking? Like, what are you doing? Or, he'll even tell me when I do things that annoy him. Say I have a habit in a meeting, and I love to get that feedback. Oh, right? Yeah. Oh, no, I see why that's annoying. So I like being challenged to be better yourself. think that's, if the relationship is working well, that's something that I love to get.
Are there any other mindsets that you found really help founders along the journey? One that you look for is asking for help and that level of vulnerability and humility. Are there any other mindsets that come to mind?
There's the whole thing about courage, resilience, whatever you call it, because there's, you're going to get challenges come from places that you can't foresee, understand, and being able to take in all of the hard stuff and decide that you're going to keep just getting up the next morning, even though it feels like, the world is about to end. So I think that strength to keep going when it's hardest is one of the things, because it's so easy to give up sometimes. I've definitely had that feeling, where we made mistakes on cash flow and we're, running out of money or whatever it is, and you've got to keep going. So when I see that in others who come across harder things, and because it just want to go, well, it's easier to give up surely at this point, and they find a way to keep going. I think that's an important mindset thing. I'm not sure there's a way to. Some people have it, but I think most people develop it.
How do they develop it?
Because you've got to go through hard things and find a way through the other side.
Is there anything that you find yourself saying to these people that really helps them in that moment of crisis?
Again, it goes back to that thing about getting people to say stuff out loud. If they feel that they can share it, I find in those moments quite often there's that little bit of help about them finding the solution when they say it out loud to somebody. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's somebody else that's talking about them. It's just them getting the information. Go, well, how do we solve this? What's that solution? Sometimes it's a chain of events. But if they say it, they don't just internalize it, they say it out loud. I mean, having co-founders, I've always had, co-founders, I don't have the emotional fortitude, frankly, or the strength to do it on my own. I think that is. I have great admiration for people like Josh in that regard as well. I've got quite a few solo founders, but I've never wanted or felt that I could do that.
In your newsletter, you've written about how maybe less experienced founders focus more on the product over the problem. What does having an obsession with the problem look like at very early stages and then later stages?
We're trying to work out how real is the problem. It goes wrong in the earlier stages where people experience something, have that in their mind as this is a really big problem, and then just go away and build without talking to anybody. And the way that comes out with founders when I meet them as an early stage investor is their first response to when talking about their business is describe everything that their product does, rather than talk about what they're doing for whom. And what that tends to signify, they spent a lot of time, and I find these a relatively high correlation in this. If they talk to you about the features, they've spent a long time building product without talking to anybody. So they don't actually know how real the problem is, how painful a problem it is. Does it exist in anything apart from their own mind? And it's always quite painful because I meet people like use their entire life savings on, because they had an idea, they got a company to build the solution to that thing, paying, let's call it agency or consultancy prices to build something, draining their reserves. So it's one of the most painful things that I come across. I have, back to that thing about what is kindness. I've met people over the last 5 years. I've begged them to stop spending money. Please just don't spend any more on this. You know, I met a founder who spent 150,000 of all their life savings on something for which there was no market. And I've had people cry when they hear that. And it's horrible. It's horrible in the moment, but I could not say it. So I just I don't want people to get to that position. I don't want, there's whether you call it opportunity cost of time or it's real cash. Just don't build on your own in a dark room with an idea that you had one day without talking to people who you think might use it. So I don't want people to have that pain. And I've seen it, and it's horrible.
If you're like me, you probably skip most of these sponsor reads. So here's the deal. If you give me 1 minute of your time, I'll give you 1 minute of my suffering at 3 degrees Celsius. Because today's sponsor is Monk Ice Baths. Oh. Now, you've probably heard the hype around cold water therapy and the benefits that it has on your mental health with reduced stress and improved sleep, and then your physical health with muscle recovery and improved circulation. And maybe you've even put together a little DIY version where you turned a chest freezer into an ice bath. Really cold. Or you've bought one of those basic cheap crap versions, both of which come with a lot of complications. That's why Monk is your best bet. Because it's... I've really lost my train of thought. Which is why Monk is your best option if you're looking to seriously invest in your mental and physical health. Backed by elite athletes like Anthony Joshua, Monk is the most professional and accessible ice bath there is. So, if you're looking to be an elite performer and invest seriously in your mental and physical health, then go to discovermonk.com and use code SCALEWITHSOUL and check out for a £100 discount. Or go to the link in the description. Now, I love this, so I'm going to stay in for a bit longer, but I think you should get back to the episode. I very much agree that we shouldn't be building in bubbles, and we need to go and talk to people, and we need to go and get that feedback. But I read an article recently by NFX, which is all around how actually sometimes there isn't a really burning problem. Sometimes the thing that founders are creating is just cool. It could just be amazing. For example, Facebook, it wasn't a burning problem, but it was something that was really cool. How do you think about the balance of painkillers versus vitamins in terms of actually solving a real pain versus something that's being quite cool?
I think we have to be really careful about using the stories of the things that became absolute, because you can post rationalize, what went on. I mean, the reality of it is that Facebook grew virally out the gate. And I still see people who come, I had one recently actually, with a kind of a niche social network with, missing the point about really, Facebook didn't need any marketing money to grow. It was just purely viral. So yes, there are exceptions, of course. But the probability that they apply to your business are so small that you have to take that into account. There have to be reasons, very strong ones, why you're the exception. And there are loads of things about business model and market and, what it is you're building, your ability, for instance, if you're going to say that you're going to grow virally, what is it about the product and what you're offering that has the potential for network effects? The more people that join, the better the product or service, whatever it is, gets. So you can't, you've got to correlate those two. Yes, you do meet truly exceptional people who just might be on something, and obviously those gone right, can create some of the biggest opportunities that there are. But I think you always just have to look at the probabilities. It's like, YC, right, is a great investor. I can't remember the stat, but it's something like 90% of their returns have come from 4 companies.
Taking the 1% of success stories and basing a rationale off those 1%. This all ties into the story that we tell ourselves, but also we tell others, specifically investors.
Yep.
How do you advise founders when they go into a fundraise? What seems to be the thing that most people don't spend enough time focusing on?
I think storytelling, the best founders are ones who can get you to believe in their vision of how the world can be different. Be incredibly convincing, despite, to a certain extent, what we talk about, despite like the evidence, in a way, because they're deciding they're going to create a new market, or, but that ability to talk about your vision, because if you can talk eloquently about your vision and the change that you're trying to see in the world, that will tend to draw great people who believe the same things to you, whether that be investors or people, leadership, or potential partners or customers. And so if you can just tell a really compelling story, and of course going back to the metrics and all of those things, what you've achieved, how you're thinking about your market, all important. But if you can tell people, really convince them that the world is going to change from what you're doing, even if it's just a small part of the world, the world for a certain part of the insurance market or whatever it is, but that you can genuinely change that bit of the world and tell a story. I think that's very powerful. And it's try not to be formulaic. Think about what that vision is. I went to see some founders the other day, and they were talking about they want to be genuinely disruptive, and they told me a story about what could be achieved. What does that look like? How are you going to disrupt this thing that you're doing? I said, well, that's amazing. That would, if you achieve that, that's absolutely incredible. And I get it, but I've known them for quite a long time. They'd never told me that. I think people often have those stories in them, but the industry, we've got the common currency of things like pitch decks and ways of communicating and the things that SaaS metrics should be. But I think if you can really tell a great story, so I said, just tell it. It might change, of course, but I think that the first time that something goes, I've written about this as well, that the first point that something goes from being impossible to being possible is just by somebody saying out loud to somebody else that it can. That's how it starts. Because the world always changes by a few people deciding that they're going to take on a challenge. My favourite story is the Wright brothers. They were bicycle repairmen. There were all these other people trying to work out powered man flight. They were better funded and whatever. These bicycle manufacturers and repairmen are the ones who solved it.
So if we're going to break down this skill of storytelling into a little bit more detail, what separates a great story from a good story?
Well, Nick's the expert on storytelling because he's also a writer. Nick talks to me a lot about the story arcs and the idea of sort of the hero's journey in particular. I think is quite an interesting one, and you can see that in Star Wars. And it has a particular arc, and I think those are the technicalities. But most of it, I think it's about if you can tell something in a way that gets people to believe something that they wouldn't have believed before you told it to them. And I think that again, it's about showing how the world changes when you achieve this. I think it's one of those things. I know it when I hear it, but it's a bit like my investing strategy. It feels a bit more like you feel it sort of in your gut, rather than me being able to really break it down. Nick could break it down for you, but I know it when I see it.
Speaking of Nick, I asked him what question he would ask you if he was sat in my shoes. And he said the things that you two have been speaking about a lot recently is everyone's obsession with AI and how most companies aren't getting funded unless they have a core element of AI in their business.
Yep.
But he said that you think that this is not as important as it's being hyped up to be, potentially.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations about this. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. AI has a massive role to play in our acceleration, towards sort of a better future. And, I think we're probably overestimating its short-term impact, but underestimating its long-term impact. Or maybe we're not. Certainly since the long term. To a certain extent, the way it's getting used, I think, to us feels a bit more like it. It's a bit like a database. It's another thing that you add to process data, and I am seeing certain companies get a greater acceleration to revenue off lower cost bases. So I think in that way, it's making a difference to what they can achieve. But I think at this point in the cycle, there's probably a tendency to slide over it, overvaluation. But I think that's often the early days of anything exciting that people see immense promise in, where it nuts out between sort of, the foundational models and who owns them or not, and what that does for different types of businesses. I'm nowhere near being even partly an expert to be able to say. I do have some businesses who are using it and applying it in ways that I think are doing good things for their audiences, and getting to good revenue quickly. But I think we see a lot of other ideas, which are just, I suppose, versions of relatively basic prompt engineering that are trying to raise at relatively high valuations, and I think those certainly are becoming increasingly easier to spot.
Just ChatGPT wrappers.
Yeah, to a larger extent, but there are, there are certain things that certainly the B2B process automation and how it extracts some of the sort of mundane tasks, being able to reduce the cost of doing certain things, doing things in a way that just wouldn't be possible, anything like the cost before. I think there's some really good stuff there. My business is guys like Will Taylor, Workflow, is doing that for creative work. And I think some of the things they will achieve with it seem really, the way they're thinking about the extraction of some of the mundane work, so creative people can have more time to put into the work, rather than sort of the processing and feedback around it. I think that he's doing some great stuff. I've got some amazing ideas that will come to the market soon. So you can start to see some of them, but we get sent a lot of B2B SaaS stuff recently that's got AI attached to it, which isn't really AI, or hasn't really generally thought about, anything more than a few prompts.
Makes sense. We're coming into the final section.
Yeah.
And I would love to shift the conversation more onto you as an individual, such that an audience can better connect with you as a person. We spent our whole conversation before we started recording talking about health and the different health approaches that we take. You've done a lot of research and you've spent a lot of time and money investing in your health. Why?
I spent a lot of the early years of my life not feeling very well, I suppose. I was very, very sick when I was very young. The first few years I could only go to school part-time because I was sick. A lot of respiratory issues, and that probably leading to me just not feeling very well. Certain restrictions that meant that exercise was, often difficult at a time where it should have been enjoyable. And then I suppose ignoring my health for a long time while I was running businesses. I wasn't great at it. Focus was, I had a young family, and businesses to run, and I suppose health was something that I thought could wait. And whilst I thought I was probably eating okay, maybe, definitely wasn't exercising, apart from sort of charging, sort of like half bent over, like in between meetings around Shoreditch and Clerkenwell and stuff. So I think I got to 49. I had some friends, another AJ, my friend AJ Leon, Mohar, who's the major investor in one of my companies, Tara, who's a friend of mine, lives in Dubai, and they were very into how you exercise. I thought, I looked at myself and thought, I'm going to be 50 soon. If I don't do something about it, I could get 60 and be in a bad place. So I went to Nick Mitchell's Ultimate Performance, and they taught me a form of exercise that I found really worked for me. They taught me about nutrition, went to a level of detail that I hadn't even considered, and changed, I would say, the direction of my health. So since that point, so it like focusing on that and how I could feel versus how I've not always felt, but certainly sort of when I was younger, that there was a way to feel different about how in how I felt myself, and in how I approached my health, and why, particularly with the family, why and then say, okay, yeah, this is really important. And so finding a way to then build that in. I'm very fortunate that I have time to put into it. I'm not running businesses with the same intensity that I did, which is, partly a conscious choice. I'm not trying to, I want to build great things, but in a way that's more sustainable compared to the way that I used to do it. But I think, certainly if we talked a lot about nutrition and how that can be the foundation of feeling better along with the exercise, along with getting great sleep. The difficult bit, obviously, when you're a founder is how the stress bit plays into all of that, which I think that's harder because the entrepreneurial journey is. I don't think there is a way to do it that doesn't involve some amounts of stress. It just does. There are going to be slings and, you're going to suffer the slings and arrows at least sometimes, if not more regularly. But health, I think, I'm still learning every day. I've learned in the last few months that other things that I thought I was doing well, I probably wasn't doing anywhere near as well as I could. But it feels like there is the start of a movement now with some amazing people doing work that will lead to the right information and systems and help getting to more and more people. It's got a long way to go to get to everybody, but it feels like the process is starting.
Quick pause to say, if you found this valuable, then think about who you know who might also find it valuable, because leaders helping other leaders makes the journey that much easier. You said you were fortunate that you didn't have the business that was running as intensely that meant you couldn't focus on your health. The thing that comes to mind for me is that it's all a choice. We can choose to focus on our health as much as we want to versus the business and vice versa. But if someone is looking to create a big business or to create outsized VC style returns, how many founders do you see prioritizing health?
I found it difficult because exercise had always been a challenge for me, for certain physiological reasons. And so you're right, it's a choice, but I think I needed just a little bit of space to experiment and find the thing that could work for me, because it wasn't just about, I couldn't just go for a run, or I couldn't do that thing that was easy to do. And I tried so many different forms of exercise over time and struggled with just about all of them. So it was just having a little bit of space and finding a thing. And then I found out of that I got to choose that could be a priority and something that I could work to. But up until that, it was like, well, that didn't work. So, I could lead myself to believe that it wasn't important. I probably convinced myself of that for a while. It's okay for now.
Going back to what you said at the start, that you've focused on health now because you were quite unwell as a child. This is something your mum spoke about when we had a conversation. And I'd love to play you parts of that conversation because it was just so incredibly heartwarming and beautiful to hear her perspective of you and how you've developed over your life. You really admire about him?
Everything. Seriously, everything. I am so proud of him. He's been a wonderful son from the day he was born. He's always been easy. He's always been a worker. So when he was 10, he always went every weekend and holidays and helped the milkman deliver milk.
Wow. Why was that?
Well, just because he didn't want to sit around, I suppose. No pushing from me, not from me, but we've always been workers in our family. Like my daughter used to go and deliver, the local paper to houses. So, yes.
Vicky said that you were the person that she believed had the biggest influence on him by a long way.
Well, I don't know if you know, but his father left when he was 2. I had then the 2 children, so Marcus was 2 and my daughter was 3.5, I think. And so I understand that she would say that because the 3 of us have always just been together and I have always discussed everything with him. I've never had any secrets from him. I treated them as one with me, if you understand.
Of course, yeah.
He is a very, very caring person and he's a wonderful father, so it just goes on.
What do you think is unique about him as a father?
Well, I think he is knowing now what he missed, if you understand me.
Yeah.
And all the things that he missed, with not having a father, he's putting that into his own 2 children. He knows how I feel about him, and I know how he feels about me, because I must tell you one thing. When he was running a business somewhere in town, and I went there, and he said, just go to the girl on the desk because I'm interviewing someone. So I went to the girl on the desk, and she said how lovely Marcus was. I think she's had an interview with him and said what a kind man he was. And he said to her, don't thank me, thank my mother. And that's what she said to me.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That is a testament to you both.
Well, that brings tears to my eyes.
If there was a message that you wanted Marcus to really remember about how you felt about him, what would that be?
Well, I honestly, truthfully, can't fault him in any way. I mean, maybe that doesn't sound real, but no, seriously, I can't. When I look back, even when he was poorly, he just sort of used to say, I'm going up to lie on the bed. He never made a fuss about anything. He's a worker. Everything about him, as far as I'm concerned, he was a perfect son.
Wow.
I mean that. I mean it very, very sincerely.
She's a very special lady.
I can tell. I was honoured to have that conversation with her, and we both feel very similarly.
She loves
about you.
talking to you.
It was felt both ways. That is all we have time for. But Thank you so much. Actually, the last thing, closing tradition, is because you've been so generous with your time, is there something that an audience of entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs can support you with?
The best way that they can is to look after each other. Find somebody to help who needs it, and be there for people when it's hardest. That's what they could do for me.
That just summarizes you perfectly. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.